At the current affairs where we witnessed lingering COVID-19 pandemic, global economic recovery remained unfavorable to be achieved. Global inequality rise to a level that never seen in the past decade. Mobility restriction policies resulting from COVID-19 prevention measures have disabled many communities to fulfill their daily needs. Risks of divisions between social groups exacerbated as the threat of scarring effect to the future generations, as well as increased risk of systemic default that put financial sector under pressure, have made the exit strategy from COVID-19 pandemic even more challenging to be executed. Such risks also result in prolonged trust deficit among countries that slow down efforts to tackle greater long-term issues, such as climate change and massive biodiversity extinction. All of these phenomena need to be followed with better formulation of economic and policy approach under one coordinated action. The Think 20, or better known as the T20, is the G20's official engagement group that connects think tanks worldwide. The T20 serves as a global ideas bank, bringing together experts from the most relevant think tanks and research institutes worldwide. The T20 develop and communicate research-based policy recommendations to the G20 leaders. In its 10th year, the T20 under the Indonesian presidency will be present to systematically produce practical policy proposals for G20 decision-makers. This year, T20 highlighted 3 strategic issues. First, promoting greater cooperation for stronger, balanced, and resilient recovery. Achieving resilient and inclusive economic recovery simultaneously by global economies is essential to reduce the risk of having prolonged crises that affect unevenly across social classes. Second, advancing concerted effort for inclusive and sustainable development. Post-pandemic development in times of changing climates needs to also consider environmental issues, while also inclusive to all communities and aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. And third, managing digital transformation to utilize technological progress. The unprecedented digital transformation as a result from COVID-19 pandemic should align with innovation that benefits communities worldwide. These strategic issues will be discussed further by think tanks across the world under the coordination of T20 Indonesia's 9 task forces. Together, these task forces, as well as all T20 participants, will join under our series of events. Alongside the support provided by these task forces, T20 Indonesia will be led by our lead co-chairs as well as executive co-chairs. The T20 Indonesia, hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the Institute for Economic and Social Research, University of Indonesia, both are think tanks that play important roles in policy-oriented research. Recover together, recover stronger.
Good evening, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Inception Conference of the Think 20 Indonesia 2022. I would like to extend our warm welcome to G20 Indonesia Sherpa track officials, G20 Indonesia Finance track officials, G20 India Sherpa track officials, lead co-chairs T20 Indonesia, honorable speakers and panelists, distinguished T20 community, and all participants, esteemed guests who are joining us via Webex and YouTube. Hope everyone is keeping well. My name is Biondi Sima. It is my honor to host you throughout these 2 days T20 Inception Conference. Esteemed guests, on the heels of the handover ceremony of the T20 presidency from Italy to Indonesia, T20 Indonesia is delighted to host the Inception Conference as our inaugural meeting. The Think 20, better known as T20, is the official engagement group of G20, bringing together leading think tanks and research centers worldwide. The role of the T20 is of critical importance, offering research-based policy recommendations to the G20 leaders. As the global economy continues to be impacted by COVID-19, Indonesia encourages all countries to collaborate in order to achieve a more robust, sustainable, and inclusive global recovery. In this spirit, T20 Indonesia is bringing the theme of realizing inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. This Inception conference is aiming to guide policy innovations during Indonesia's G20 presidency, addressing priority areas such as climate change and digital transformation, as well as social cohesion, growth, and financial stability. Before we begin, we would like to thank our partners for their generous support to this conference, Telkom Indonesia and Samudra Indonesia as our sponsors, and the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia or AREA, Knowledge Sector Initiative or KSI, and the Asian Development Bank Institute or ADBI as our knowledge partners. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to encourage you, esteemed guests, to participate and engage with us by relaying your thoughts and substantive recommendations that you can write via the chat box. And while doing so, please mention your name and affiliation. The T20 Secretariat will gladly forward your suggestions and thoughts to the pertinent task forces. For your convenience, during the conference, we would like to inform you that you can turn off the caption feature by clicking the CC button located at the bottom left of your screen. Now, to kick off this Inception conference, we have the privilege to invite Professor Bambang Brojonegoro as the lead co-chair of T20 Indonesia to officially open this conference. Professor Bambang Brojonegoro currently serves as the President Commissioner of PT Telkom Indonesia Tbk and PT Bukalapak.com, two main leading technology companies in Indonesia. For more than 10 years, Professor Bambang was appointed as the Minister of Finance, Minister of Development Planning, and Minister of Research and Technology. He served within the three cabinets of Indonesia's presidency. Professor Bambang earned a PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and currently is a professor of economics at the University of Indonesia. Afterwards, please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Minister Retno Lestari Priyansari Marsudi to deliver her keynote speech. Her Excellency Retno LP Marsudi is the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia since 2014. The first woman to ever hold this post, Minister Marsudi served as Indonesia's ambassador to the Kingdom of Netherlands in 2012 to 2014 and the ambassador to the Kingdom of Norway and the Republic of Iceland in 25 to 28. She has received various national and international awards for her contributions on international affairs. Now, without further ado, let me hand over the screen to Professor Bambang, followed immediately by Minister Retno. First to Professor Bambang, you may please have the screen, Professor.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the T20 Indonesia Inception Conference 2022. Let me begin by extending my warmest greeting to Her Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Indonesia, Ibu Retno Marsudi, His Excellency Minister of Health, Republic of Indonesia, Bapak Budi Gunadi Sadikin, Excellency Ambassador Abaf Thakur, G20 India Sherpa, His Excellency Ambassador Dian Triansah Jani, Co-Sherpa G20 Indonesia, Dr. Raden Edi Priyo Pambudi, Co-Sherpa G20 Indonesia, Dr. Wempi Saputra, Finance Deputy G20 Indonesia, Profesor Jisman Simanjuntak, Lead Co-Chair T20 Indonesia, Profesor Mari Elka Pangestu, Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnership, the World Bank, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Director of Center for Sustainable Development, Columbia University, Professor Paolo Magri, Chair of T20 Italy, Professor Richard Baldwin, Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator of United Nations Development Program, Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, International Renewable Energy Agency, all distinguished speakers and panelists, the T20 community, and all the participants. Welcome and thank you for participating in the conference virtually. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, global economic recovery is on track, albeit at a more moderate phase than initially anticipated due to the resurgence of COVID-19 in many parts of the world. In its latest report, the IMF has cautioned of the potential persistency of the growth divergence due to the COVID-19 vaccination rates, which could influence the medium-term macroeconomic performance of countries across the world. Like the rest of the world, the G20 economies have positioned their policy emphasis on managing the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in 2020 and early parts of 2021. With certain relaxation of mobility restriction on the back of rising rates of vaccination and the wider availability of testing, tracing, capacity, and medical facilities, including medicines for COVID-19, the national policy perspectives have in stages shifted to economic agenda. Unquestionably, the COVID-19 pandemic has left transitory and structural impacts on the global economy. The transition from the pandemic period to the recovery stage will likely require global coordination of the exit policy strategies from the unprecedented worldwide expansionary macroeconomic policy stances. In the past, the exit policy agenda was the domain of the advanced economies, especially following the 2007-2008 global financial crisis. The unwinding of the stimulus policies during the global COVID-19 pandemic crisis will necessitate a much wider international and domestic policy coordination within and between the advanced and the emerging markets. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, beyond the current pandemic episode, the stronger than expected penetration of the digitalization into the economic activities during the pandemic period has transformed markets and regulations across economic sectors, including in the financial sector. Based on the studies from the 1385 fintech firms in 169 jurisdictions, the World Bank has found these firm performances have largely been resilient in spite of the COVID-19, growing in the transaction numbers and volumes by 13% and 11% year-on-year, respectively, during the first half of 2020. The health crisis has also deepened the awareness and strengthened the commitment toward the climate change, green economy, and sustainable development. The global drives in these areas encompass not only industrial transformation, but potentially reforms of the financial institution and the formations of green financial asset classes across the global financial market. Furthermore, considering the recent development, upholding the inclusivity aspect of the discussion on the G20 level might not be an easy task. Global issues such as global health architecture, climate change, and digital transformation happens in a scale that requires collective action, and ensuring the commitments from all government and stakeholders is almost non-negotiable. There are needs of more alignment on tackling global issues among developed and emerging countries, especially as these countries and low-income countries are as much affected by the current crisis as developed countries, if not more. Thus, an increased active participation from emerging countries in the discussion is crucial to ensure a working global policy initiatives being shaped are considered just and fair and could be accepted by all governments from all types of countries. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, deemed as the idea bank of G20 with the aim to supply research-based policy recommendation to the G20 leaders, T20 could and should serve as an anchor to ensure inclusivity and unbiased prioritization of the issues discussed. To fulfill this role, foundation of T20 is built on numerous task forces, each representing specific global challenges that needs to be addressed during the ongoing presidency. This gives T20 the capability and capacity needed to formulate task forces such that it represents beyond the critical issues experienced by the host country. The inclusivity aspect has become more imperative than ever, as the COVID-19 pandemic creates widening inequality across countries and worsening the global socio-economical imbalance. Though challenging, it is within the power of T20 to ensure its research agenda and formulation is equally representing both developed and developing countries. Considering the importance of role held by T20, Indonesia aims to continue the exemplary work of the current and previous T20 presidency in the upcoming year. coincide with the 10-year anniversary of T20 establishment, Indonesia intends to put its best in ensuring the objectivity and inclusivity of policy recommendation. With its unique position, T20 has the opportunity to offer the impartial views from research perspective in the G20 discussion through extensive engagement with the public, policymakers, and research community across the world. On that note, I'm honored to declare the T20 Inception Conference officially open. May we all have a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much, and now I respectfully invite Her Excellency, Minister Retno Marsudi, to deliver her keynote speech.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Bambang Brojonegoro, lead co-chair of T20 Indonesia. Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin, Excellencies, distinguished speakers and guests, a very good evening from Jakarta. I'm honored to be in the presence of some of the brightest minds in the world. And from the brightest minds come the brightest ideas. Ideas that make a difference, ideas that change the world, ideas that improve livelihood of the people, in particular the poor. Over the past decade, T20 has contributed to the work of G20 by serving as a repository of ideas and providing research-based policy recommendation. As an open and independent forum, T20 has a bird's eye view, thus able to offer bold and innovative solutions to global challenges. Indonesia G20 presidency has high expectation for T20. We need T20 help to make our presidency impactful and relevant to the world at large, particularly developing countries, thereby ensuring inclusivity. Concrete and implementable policy advices from T20 are critical to achieve meaningful results in 3 priority sectors under Indonesia presidency. First, on strengthening global health architecture. Colleagues, immediate actions need to focus on closing the global vaccination gap by promoting equity and accelerating vaccines manufacturing and delivery worldwide. G20 must also look beyond this pandemic and help prepare the world for any future health emergencies. We look forward to hearing from you on how G20 could contribute to boosting local health capacity, such as designing an effective early warning system, training health workforces, and promoting self-reliance in medicines and medical equipment. At the global level, we are hoping to see how G20 could bolster health financing support for developing countries, developing an international framework for procurement, stockpiling, and distribution of medicine and medical equipment, and increase participation of developing countries in global health supply chains. Second, supporting digital transformation. Colleagues, our immediate priority must be to bridge digital divide between and within countries. Many people and countries continue to be disadvantaged due to lack of affordable and reliable digital infrastructure. We are hoping to hear recommendations on how G20 could accelerate digital access and inclusion in developing countries, generate investment opportunities on ICT sector in developing countries, and help people from developing countries better capitalize on economic opportunities provided by digital transformation. And finally, third, ensuring energy transition achievable for all. Colleagues, energy transition is an essential step in our path toward a greener and more sustainable economy. Such transition will also provide an opportunity for countries to embrace sustainable growth and address climate change. Unfortunately, many countries cannot afford the cost of such transition. Thus, I invite T20 to identify how G20 could promote access to affordable green technology, help developing countries tap into innovative financing for energy transition, and mitigate the inevitable impact of energy transition on people relying on the current sources of energy for livelihood. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we are now standing at a crucial point in human history. The decision we made today will determine our tomorrow. Our choices now will matter for the future generation. I believe we can make those choices wiser with inputs from T20. Together rise up to the challenge and recover stronger for a better future. I bid you a successful Inception conference. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Bambang Brojonegoro and Her Excellency Ratno Marsudi for your encouraging opening remarks and keynote speech to our Inception conference of the Indonesian T20. We are indeed looking forward to hearing breakthrough ideas and solutions throughout the coming year under Indonesia's G20 presidency. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, recognizing the importance of collective action and inclusive collaboration among major developed countries and emerging economies around the world has always been the core purpose of the G20. Today, the world needs this inclusive collaboration more than ever. Therefore, it is important to mainstreaming sustainability and global cooperation and recovery agenda. And now I have the pleasure to turn to Professor Paolo Magri, who would be chairing the first session of this Inception conference on mainstreaming sustainability and global cooperation in recovery agenda. Professor Paolo Magri is the Executive Vice President of the Italian Institute for International Political Studies, or ISPI, and Professor of International Relations at Bocconi University. He is a member of the Strategic Committee of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, a member of the Europe Policy Group of the World Economic Forum at Davos, and a member of the Board of Directors of the Italy-China Foundation. He is also a member of the Board of Experts of the GlobSec Global Europe Initiative, as well as a member of the scientific committees of the Center of Excellence for Stability Policy Units and of the Military Center for Strategic Studies. Professor Paolo Magri, the screen is yours.
Good evening, afternoon, morning. Let me first thank T20 Indonesia for this kind invitation. I promise my introduction will be shorter than the reading of my CV, and I'm glad to chair this first session on mainstreaming sustainability and global cooperation in recovery agenda. Or, in other words, how and to what extent international cooperation can support a sustainable and inclusive recovery. Let me start by recalling that recovery is already with us. Plus 5.5 in global GDP in 2021, the highest in 50 years. An impressive rebound from the COVID-induced recession, but as we all know, a shaky and unequal one. The UN warned that global recovery may lose steam, with poorer countries bearing higher costs in terms of GDP per capita, and poverty on the rise for the first time in over 20 years, and widening inequalities. Poor countries cannot use the fiscal and monetary bazookas available to rich countries. And as we know, their access to international financial markets is anything but fair. Two major risks arise. First, SDGs may be harder to be met. And second, a new financial crisis may severely hit poor countries and their ability to adapt to climate change. So against this backdrop, how to recover together, recover stronger, as the motto of the G20 T20 Indonesia goes. The G20 and other international fora have already tried hard to answer this, but frankly speaking, the answer is only partial at best. So how can we ensure equitable and sustainable recovery in least developed and developing countries? For instance, by facilitating access to financial markets also through blended financing, harmonization of ESG standards, and much more. But I stop here because we are lucky, very lucky, to have with us Marie-Elka Pangestu, Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnership at the World Bank, and Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Good afternoon, morning, or evening to you, and thanks for being with us at the invitation of the T20 Indonesian group. Let me first turn to Professor Sachs. Jeffrey, how to enhance sustainable investment and global development cooperation in our post-pandemic recovery? And do you think that sustainable development goals are still achievable and fit for purpose?
Thank you very much, Paolo.
Hello.
Greetings.
Huh?
Thank you, Paolo. And greetings, Marie, and thank
Marie,
you
you have to disconnect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, great. Thank you. I want to thank the T20 for its leadership, Paolo, for your leadership of the T20 in the Italian presidency, and Professor Bangbang and all of the colleagues, and Minister Maruti for a wonderful statement.
No.
We need to increase the financial flows to the half the world that is not accessing the financial flows now. So we absolutely need to be realistic about what has been happening even before COVID. We were far off track of financing the energy transformation. We were far off track of financing climate adaptation. We were far off track of financing the Sustainable Development Goals. The international capital markets are not functioning for inclusive development. There are 82 countries that are classified by the World Bank as low income or lower middle income. They constitute half the world's population. But of those 82 countries, 79 do not have an investment grade credit rating. This is a failure of the credit rating system. It is a barrier to inclusive finance. It requires a reconceptualization that looks forward in understanding what is financeable, creditworthy, and growth-oriented. Currently, the rating system is backward-looking. It is naive. If you are poor, you are punished. And we do not have in place at the IMF, the World Bank, which are in a way scorekeepers of this process, or the rating agencies, a meaningful process for sustainable investment and sustainable finance. At COP26, Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, brought together an alliance for net zero investment with combined assets under management of $130 trillion. That's excellent, but it will not flow to half the world under the current arrangements. So we need at the G20 this year, especially hearing the words of Minister Marudi, brilliant words about the crucial role of Indonesia in achieving an inclusive world and representing the developing countries in this process, that the bottom half of the world be represented. I would urge, incidentally, that the African Union be invited as the 21st member of the G20, not as a guest, but as a member, the same way that the European Union is a member. That would bring 1.4 billion people to the table through the chairperson of the African Union, and it would enable a real discussion about what global inclusion means. The what to invest is clear. We have pathways, starting with vaccine coverage, and pathways of massive scale up of renewable energy, especially solar power in Indonesia and across the world. We have the International Energy Agency pathway to net zero. We even have costing of what it will take to achieve universal health coverage, digital access, energy transition, the three priorities that have been identified. I would like to add, incidentally, three other priorities as well for our consideration, which is universal education, urban infrastructure in a fast urbanizing world, and sustainable land use and nature-based solutions, especially since Indonesia is one of the world's most beautiful places and one of the most biodiverse places in the world. We need nature-based solutions as well. Let me point out quickly, Paolo, 3 points. First, cooperation between the US and China is essential. And the bickering between the two is going to undermine global recovery and global sustainable development. I put a large responsibility on the side of the US. Too much fighting, too much complaining, not enough cooperation. And so I hope that the G20 can be an arena for cooperation. The US and China signed an agreement on cooperation for climate change. Let's see that put into place at the G20 process. 3 main regions, China with the Belt and Road Initiative, the United States with the Build Back Better World Initiative, and the European Union with the Global Gateway, should not see these as competing initiatives, but as cooperative initiatives that together could help build energy transformation finance for the whole world, including the low income and the lower middle income countries. So BRI, B3W, and Global Gateway cooperating under a G20 auspices. Second, and Marie will no doubt talk about it in a moment, expanded financing through the multilateral development banks and the other public development banks and the development finance institutions. These institutions can tap capital markets at still low interest rates and greatly expand their balance sheets. They need more paid-in capital. They need to be supported by the G20 so that they can do their job with a great expansion of their portfolios. And the third is unlocking the market financing by reconceptualizing what is debt sustainability. Well, if you have to borrow at 10% interest rates, you can't borrow very much. But if you can borrow at 2% interest rates, like the United States government or the European governments, well, then it becomes possible to finance infrastructure, to finance solar power, to finance urban infrastructure. If we think this through clearly and quantitatively, there is a way to unlock that $130 trillion. And again, the G20 has a special role to play in this process. So I believe that this is the process and this is the G20 of inclusive finance. And by directing the attention of the T20 and the G20 governments to truly inclusive finance, not for the rich countries, not just for the upper middle income countries, but for the bottom half of the world, 4 billion people who are not part of recovery or sustainable development right now, then I think this will be the historic G20 that we know that it will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What a start, I would say. I'm happy to now turn to Mary Pangestu. Mary, the pandemic has led to a serious reversal of development progress achieved over the last 20 years on poverty, inequalities, capital and gender equality gains. Can we, or how can we turn this challenge into an opportunity for a more sustainable and inclusive growth and development? And what is the specific role of multilateral development banks?
Thank you, Paolo. It's great to be back in a T20 meeting and kick the year off with a T20 in Indonesia today. I think the T20, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs mentioned, can play and should play a key role in providing policy proposals that will help the G20 in achieving its goals of coordinated actions that will get us out of, not just get us out of this recession, but also do it in a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient manner. So turning to your question, Paolo, I think what we are facing, I think one of the homework for T20 is to make sure that there is a great understanding of what the problem we are trying to solve, which is the great reversal in development because of the pandemic, or accentuating what was already development challenges before the pandemic. So we have poverty, increased poverty of 100 million. We have increased inequality within countries and between countries because of the two-track recovery. And it's very much related to unequal vaccine access, as well as subdued investment and, of course, lower capacity to do fiscal stimulus. We also have a huge setback on human capital losses, on women, on learning losses, on health related aspects to human capital, malnutrition, lack of vaccination of children, etc., etc. And that can lead to a decade of lost development. And I think this is something which is a priority. And at the same time, we are facing increased shocks from climate-related disasters. So, and unattended or business as usual is going to lead to 130 million more people with extreme poverty, right? So you have this twin, not just recovering the development gains, but you also have the climate crisis at the same time, which means if my main message, and I'll try to illustrate it to T20, is we need to not just be business as usual in the way we design the policies for recovery, growth, and development. We need to understand the interlinkages between people, planet, and the economy, and do the recovery process, growth process, development process in that integrated way. And this is really the theme of T20. You know, how do we achieve sustainable or green, resilient, and inclusive recovery, growth, and development? And that requires us to really think in a different way, in an integrated way. The first urgency is, of course, to deal with the health issue, which is to promote fast, fair vaccine rollout, especially in developing countries, because that is at the moment one of the biggest issues. And what you asked, what multilateral institutions can do, of course, there is this multilateral task force between the World Bank, WTO, WHO, and the IMF to really make sure that these rollout of vaccines can happen. But that can't happen on its own. Countries also have to be ready to receive the vaccines. So there's a whole program that needs to be done on the supply side as well as on the demand side. And the World Bank has provided 7.5 billion to 67 countries to help buy and distribute COVID-19 vaccines, tests, and treatments, and strengthening the health system. So you address the short-term health issue while also addressing the longer-term issue. And in the G20 year, also this year, the focus is on not just this pandemic, but the next pandemic. So how do we prepare ourselves better for the next pandemic? So the pandemic preparedness policies, gaps that need to be addressed in countries, and the financing that needs to come up with it. And taking a longer term perspective, how do we approach, everybody's talking about a crisis is always an opportunity to build back better. I think that's been kind of the mantra since last year. But how do you actually do it? I think is what I hope we will challenge T20 to come up with some of the ways forward. And really, it is about how to have an integrated approach that recognizes the interlinkages between people, planet, and the economy. So you can have a growth which is paying attention to climate, but at the same time, you are achieving growth, whether it's renewable energy, green technologies, and creating jobs at the same time, and being inclusive in the approach. Women must be at the center of the GRID approach. We're calling our approach GRID, Green, Resilient, Inclusive Development, because women have been the most impacted. Technology and innovation will also play an essential role. The minister mentioned this, whether it's for digitalization or for greening economies, and so on. So let me close with the how to, the key of it is really how to drive a strong investment push. I think Jeffrey also mentioned this. The need for us to achieve GRID, Green, Resilient, and Inclusive Growth and Development, is huge. We know we have to invest in physical capital, human capital, natural capital, and this requires vast investments, whether it's in investing in human capital or in a climate and development sustainable goal kind of integrated approach. And so my final message is that it has to be integrated between domestic and international. And the elements of it are, first of all, it has to start at home. Domestically, countries have to come up with the framework, the policies, and the institutional strengthening to be able to enable the financing to come in and be targeted to the poor, targeted for climate and development, and so on. And one of the big issues is getting prices right? The relative price of carbon right. So fiscal systems need to be mobilized to mobilize domestic resources effectively. Taxes on public bads such as pollution are a large and unused potential revenue source. You want to talk about fuel subsidies, coal subsidies. They can be repurposed for sustainable activities, carbon pricing, carbon taxes, and so on. Second, what's the role of development and concessional finance? They need to be expanded to support investment and mitigate associated risks. And how do we crowd in the private sector? And here is where I think I would close with a framing that I hope will help us in our discussion. Whenever you talk about this integrated approach, it's a differentiated investment needs. You can take something like energy transition that is the priority for the G20 year this year. You have a coal exit component, you have energy access a component of renewable energy, you have a just transition component, and then you have to develop the modern grid and the modern technology, and then you have to do something about your state-owned enterprises normally. That's different sources of investment. Some of it will be domestic, some of it will have to come from differentiated sources of financing. Concessional and grants that will help to catalyze the private sector. And that comes from multilateral development banks, bilateral ODA, as well as foundations. The private sector won't come in without those necessary reform and a policy platform and potentially catalyst to de-risk the high risk that can be involved with these long-term investments, as well as to reduce the cost of coming in. And that is really at the heart of the blended finance. So I think we need to look at it in a holistic way with the objective of differentiated investment needs as well as differentiated sourcing needs, but do it in the framing of an integrated platform of green, resilient, and inclusive recovery, growth, and development. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have still time for a couple of shorter question and answer. And I would immediately turn back to Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey, the Federal Reserve announced the raise of interest rates. And do you see this as a possible trigger for a financial crisis hitting particularly hard low and middle income countries?
First, everything's possible in international financial markets and financial systems because we have crises roughly every 10 years, 1997, 2008. So I would not rule out anything. We have had an extraordinary expansion of the money supply by the major central banks, especially the Fed, trillions of dollars printed, trillions. And that's why we have absurdities like Bitcoin at $40,000 for something that's completely worthless. And that is essentially because we've got so much liquidity. Ironically, while it did prevent a financial crisis in the early days of COVID, it doesn't really stimulate long-term investment flows to developing countries or to sustainable development. It's fraught, and it leads to this $2 trillion in cryptocurrency nonsense, really a huge problem. So the answer is there will be tightening. It will make things harder. It means we have to be even more systematic about ensuring that there are long-term sustained financial flows to development. And we have to understand the system is broken right now. It's not just a matter of getting one's house in order. There are many countries in the low and lower middle income country categories that have their house in order, but they don't have credit ratings that are compatible with sustainable development. And if you look at the credit rating systems, they are absolutely mindless, in fact. They just score you negatively if you're poor. And so we have a system that is designed to keep capital away from poor countries. And we need to take this on seriously. Finance ministers need to understand this. They need to look at it. Because otherwise we have African countries paying 10% coupon rates for borrowing, and then they get into debt crises every few years, and you say, well, why? Because you cannot have sustainable development at 10% coupon rates. So the answer is we're in a bit more treacherous territory because of all the money printing, but we didn't even have before COVID a working global financial system. We were not financing the energy transformation, and we were not financing the sustainable development goals. And the G20 is the place to do the homework so that we really get this in place.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And I will stay on a point you mentioned with the next question to Mari. How can sustainable investment be enhanced through global development cooperation, and I would say in particular through the G20 in this post-pandemic recovery?
I think I'll elaborate based on the last part of my answer. I think a sustainable investment for sustainable growth and development is going to be key moving forward, and the scale and the amounts needed are going to be huge, whether it's for addressing the reversals in development or whether it's for climate and development needs. And if we are going to be able to address climate, we need to have vast amounts of investment. So I think the big question out there is how do we finance these vast needs? I think we have to start with an agreement on the framing, and that's why I hope T20 can come up with the framing of the policies that are needed to make sure that you have a framework that is at the country level or at the global level, which very much integrates the planet, the people, and the economy, as I mentioned earlier. This is not easy, but it has to start with at the country level. And if countries are being asked to contribute to climate, as now the focus, say, for instance, on major emitters to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, that is a global public good, right? And I think there's a big debate right now. If you are what you're doing is also good for your country, but also good globally, where's the benefit for you, and where's the financing and the incentive for you to do that, to come in? It comes with the financing, obviously, but it also has to come from the policy reforms and changes that provide a clear direction in the longer term of your sustainable development pathway. So I think that's the first point I would make. So second, how do we bring in the different sources of finance? Multilateral development banks, concessional funding from different sources, including to the low-income countries. I think let's distinguish between low-income countries and middle-income countries. Jeffrey is absolutely right. You know, low-income countries need a different approach, and they are more about adaptation normally rather than mitigation. And so the World Bank, let me just explain what the World Bank is doing. We have done just recently a 93 billion replenishment package for IDA, which is our assistance for the poorest countries. And there it is really climate change theme and helping countries with the impact of climate change preserve natural capital and biodiversity while addressing poverty and inequality. But these are countries, as Jeffrey was saying, that cannot access, you can say, okay, let's have blended finance, but they can't access private capital, partly because of credit rating, partly because of the debt issue, that debt overhang and potential risks of debt sustainability now as well as in the near future. So there also needs to be international cooperation to address the ability for these countries to be able to access non-concessional funding and private sector and other funding that needs to come in. For that to come in, then you need that blended finance platform where there is concessional grants that help to de-risk, reduce the cost of financing. But de-risking includes the policy framework. Where is my money going to, and what is the money being used for? Whether you're a donor or a private sector, or even should be government, you ought to be able to see the effectiveness of the use of the financing, that it is achieving this bigger goal of green, resilient, and inclusive development in the country, as well as delivering on global public goods such as climate. I think this is really the challenge. And we need to get the framing right. We need to get the policy framework right, and help MDBs are in a position to help countries support them on coming up with the development framing. And I think T20 has a big role to play there. And finally, how do you bring the differentiated sources of funding together? It has to come together, otherwise you're not going to get the scale. World Bank on its own, even if we have a 35% commitment for climate financing, that's only 25 billion, which is far short of the so-called 100 billion or more that's needed every year just to address the climate needs. So I think this is really the big challenge, to bring all the financing together, but do it in a way which is in the framing and having the scale and the impact, because you're bringing together the concessional, the grants, the government resources, and then all the MDB, ODA, and so on in one platform, and making sure that you can crowd in the private sector. Private sector has to probably be financing most of these investments, but they aren't going to come in without that framework in place, and have the incentive perhaps with the de-risking instruments and so on.
Thank you, Mary. I think we have time only for, sorry?
I wonder whether I could just add to one word of Marie's comments, which I agree with.
Of course you can,
completely.
but let me add a quick question for you on top of your reaction. We are facing inflation. We don't know if inflation is here to stay. How can inflation, if it stays, impact recovery and green goals in the short run? Can you combine your two comments?
Absolutely. First, I just wanted to emphasize that it's not only the low-income countries that are in a problem, it's the lower middle-income countries, which are 3.3 billion people. It's a much larger group. There are 55 lower middle-income countries. 52 of them do not have an investment-grade credit rating right now. Most of the world does not. And we have to take this on directly. And I hope that the G20 finance ministers get it, because otherwise we're talking past each other. And what Marie said is a framework, a package, integrated, but also understanding it's not just the poor countries and concessional financing. The poor countries also need market financing, but these 3.3 billion people in the 55 lower middle income countries need a different framing right now. And so I think that's a very high priority, and I'm grateful to Murray for having pointed out this integrated package, because I think that this is essential. On inflation, this has been really a turbulent period because of COVID. And as I said, starting last March 2020, the central banks just massively opened up the spigot, and they prevented a financial crisis in the midst of the sharpest downturn since World War II. They did a good job, but they built up this layer of liquidity that's going to be unwound now, and it's going to have to be done very, very carefully, without rigidity, without creating another crisis by unwinding this too abruptly. But it means that probably we built in some moderate inflation, not super high inflation, but some moderate inflation for some period. It's not just it's not just the supply lines that have been disrupted, though that plays a role. There is a supply side element to this. There really is a monetary element, but it arose after years and years of QE, even after 2008, and then the biggest increase of base money of the major currencies starting March 2020. You can actually date it to one day. Because they said, oh my God, we're going into a tailspin from COVID unless we open up the spigots. Now the spigots are being closed, but they have to make sure they don't create an artificial disruption. And while it would take us far afield, both the 1997 crisis, which started with the Thai baht devaluation, and the 2008 crisis, which started with the Lehman bankruptcy on September 14, were human-made, basically in the short-term capital markets, and we can't make that mistake again.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jeffrey. We heard many big challenges. There are high expectations on the G20, T20. Luckily enough, we are in good hands, and I wish good luck to T20 Indonesia, and we all wish you really all the best. What you do is relevant to all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Professor Paulo Magri, for chairing the opening panel of this Inception conference, and to Professor Mari Alkapangestu and Professor Jeffrey Sachs for sharing your provoking and stimulating thoughts for the T20 community to really work towards thinking and producing policy frameworks that can help resolve these increasingly complex issues. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was only the beginning of our conference. Now, before we move on to the next session, which are plenary session 1 and plenary session 2, I'd like to invite all of you, distinguished guests and participants, to make use of this momentum. Share your thoughts and relay your recommendations on the strategic issues championed in this year's leadership on the T20 Indonesia via the chat box. The T20 Secretariat will circulate your input to the appropriate task forces. Thank you very, very much for your active engagement throughout this Inception conference. Now, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, the global pandemic has had a profound effect on every facet of society, from health to socioeconomic dynamics, from energy to world trade. As has been mentioned, Indonesia will focus its G20 2022 presidency on three major pillars: global health architecture, sustainable energy transition, and digital transformation. Global recovery will require greater global cooperation from public and private sectors, as well as the community, to ensure quality of global health standards, as well as closer collaboration to ensure the global community's resilience to any future pandemics on the road to current recovery. To dig deeper on these priority areas, we will start from the session chaired by the Honorable Professor Hasbullah Tabrani as Task Force 6 on Global Health Security and COVID-19, lead co-chair of the T20 Indonesia, who will convene the session on global health architecture and financing. Professor Hasbullah Tabrani is a professor and former dean of the School of Public Health, University of Indonesia. He is also a former chairman of the Center for Health Economics and Policy Studies at the university. He is now serving as the chief of party at USAID Health Financing Activity for 2019 to 2024 to ensure sustainable health financing in Indonesia with Think Well Global. Dr. Tabrani established PAMJAKI, or Association of Health Insurance Professionals of Indonesia, in 1998 and served as its chairman until October 2010. He was a key person in reforming healthcare and social security in Indonesia when he was a secretary of the Task Force for Social Health Insurance Reform, established by former President Megawati. Professor Hasbullah Tabrani, when you're ready, you may please have the screen.
Thank you, Bondi, for the kind of introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, speakers, and participants. Before I begin my session, I would like to thank the organizing committee for the invitation and opportunity to chair the session on global health architecture and financing. This is a crucial topic as we need to strengthen global health architecture and financing together in order to build a world that is more resilient to pandemic and future shock. The resources might include funds, vaccine, drugs, medical devices, and health workers who are ready to be deployed at any time to help countries experiencing health crisis. In addition, the process of restructuring the architecture of global health resilience must be inclusive and adhere to the principle of solidarity, justice, transparency, and equity. So we invite His Excellency Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin to deliver his keynote speech. Good evening, Dr. Gunadi. Pak Menteri, are you there? Well, before His Excellency Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin show up, I would like to briefly introduce him to you, all the participants. As a Minister of Health, he's currently actively involved in overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic by opening international network and mobilizing domestic resources for the procurement of the PCR test equipment, COVID vaccine, and vaccine implementation and distribution system, as well as procurement of drugs for COVID-19. Mr. Budi Gunadi Sadikin started his career in 1988 as Information Technology Officer at IBM Asia Pacific Head Office in Tokyo, Japan, and later joined PT Bank Bali until 1999. Next, he served as Director of Consumer and Commercial Banking for ABN AMRO Bank Indonesia and Malaysia. He also briefly joined PT Bank Danamon and Adira Quantum Multifinance. So this is a unique one. Mr. Bunadi is in contrast with Dr. Jim Yong Kim, who was coming from the health sector and become president of the World Bank Group. Mr. Budi Gunadi Sadikin coming from financial sector to health sectors. Minister, you have it's about 15 minutes to share your thoughts and screen. You welcome, Pak Budi.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In 1940, political leaders came together to forge the multilateral system following the devastations of the two world wars. The aims were clear: to build a peaceful, prosperous, healthy, and secure world. To overcome challenges at that time, leaders brought countries together in the spirit of solidarity and cooperation and dispelled the temptations of isolationism. Today, the COVID-19 pandemic has become the most prominent challenge our global community has endured since the two world wars. Entering its third year, we have lost approximately 5.7 million lives, and 400 million people fell ill due to COVID-19. As we fight to overcome the pandemic together, we hold the same hope: a more robust global health architecture that will protect future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that nobody is safe until everyone is safe. Other pandemics and major health emergency will occur, and no single government or multilateral agency can address this threat alone. The question is not if, but when. As Indonesia assumes the G20 presidency, Indonesia is committed to three priorities in the health sector. And for your information, the Indonesia G20 presidency only has three agendas. The first agenda is health, second agenda is digital economy, and third agenda is energy transitions. So my responsibility is for the first agenda, which is the health sector. And it is very clear that the president would like to do reform in global health architecture so we can give the future generation a much better global health systems. Indonesia is committed as the president of G20 to three priorities. First, we encourage countries to build a global health system resilience by synergizing financial and essential health resource mobilizations and global surveillance enhancement by sharing genomic data through open platforms. To respond to the current and future global health threats, strengthening global health security is paramount for global health resilience. Together, we must enhance our capacity to predict, to prevent, to detect, and to assess effectively response the pandemics in a highly coordinated manner. Second, Indonesia is proposing that we can harmonize the global health protocol standard as people and goods mobility has been faster than ever. It is essential to ensure a comprehensive health protocol standard to safeguard the world from future diseases outbreaks. We must realize that the problems of modern times require innovative solutions. Together, we need to harmonize global health protocol standard in international travel to allow rapid social and economic recovery, among others, by enabling digital applications to mutually recognize health information system for cross-border mobility. Third, Indonesia also would like to propose to the world how we can expand and redistribute equally global manufacturing hub and the global research hubs for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. The world demands new ways of thinking about health systems. Hence, should not put our eggs only in one basket. We need to expand the global manufacturing capacities of health products, particularly for vaccine, therapeutics, and diagnostic, and personal protective equipment too. Together, we need to better streamline the essential countermeasure supply chain to reinforce the global health systems for the future pandemics. Ladies and gentlemen, at a time when COVID-19 has exploited our weaknesses and divisions, we must come together as a global community for peaceful cooperations that extend beyond this crisis. Building our capacities and systems will and require a sustained political, financial, and societal commitment over many years. Only by investing in what matters, we can minimize the social economic impact of the future pandemic. As health leaders and thought leaders, it is our responsibility to ensure that the world learns the lesson of the COVID-19 pandemic taught us. Our solidarity in ensuring future preparedness will be our legacy that protects our children and the children of our children. Let us be guided by solidarity, fairness, transparency, inclusiveness, and equity to make this commitment a reality, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin. I hope if you have time, you can stay until the end of the session, because we have three experts here to discuss about this COVID and the architecture, the health architectures. I would like to continue this session with a talk show, and I would like to invite first Professor Rifat Atun. Hello, Professor Rifat Atun. Good morning there.
Yes, hello, good morning and good evening to you.
Okay, thank you. And we invite Mrs. Farah Songwei. Good afternoon, I believe, there in Africa. Yeah. Mrs. Farah? Yeah. Are you there?
Afternoon from Ethiopia.
Okay, thank you. And Professor Sachin Chaturvedi.
Good evening.
Good
evening. Namaskar.
Good evening also there. Thank you very much. Before we begin, I would like to introduce each of the panelists today to respond to His Excellency Budi Gunadi Sadikin. As just background information, Indonesia has been, in my view, very successful in controlling COVID. We have so far only 16,000 per 1 million cases accumulation, about half of what's the accumulated cases in India. Roughly, it's a little bit above 30,000. Yeah. Well, we don't know for the future. Our COVID is increasing in a upscale trend. So we can have a discussion first with Professor Rifat Atun. Professor Rifat Atun is Professor of Global Health System at Harvard University and the Faculty Chair of the Harvard Ministerial Leadership Program. In 2006-2013, Dr. Atun was Professor of International Health Management and Head of the Health Management Group at Imperial College, London. In 2008 until 2012, he served as member of the Executive Management Team of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, GFATM, as the Director of Strategy, Performance Evaluation, and Evaluation Cluster, where he chaired the panel that oversaw investment of around $4 billion each year in more than 100 countries. And also, Mrs. Farah Songwei, our second panelist, is the United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, or ECA. Upon her appointment, she became the first woman to lead the institution in its 60-year history. As Executive Secretary, Song Shui Reform have focused on developing and implementing ideas for a prosperous Africa. They have emphasized the critical importance of the macroeconomic stability, innovative finance, private sector participation, digital transformation, trade, and competitiveness in fostering growth and improving livelihood. And our last panelist, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General, Research and Information System for Developing Countries in New Delhi. He is also Vice Chairman of Madhya Pradesh State Policy and Planning Commission and Vice Chairman Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Good Governance and Policy Analysis, and member, Board of Governors, Reserve Bank of India. For your information, India will be the next presidency of the G20. Welcome all of you, panelists. We will discuss about this global and certainly among G20. First, I would like to ask, maybe this question can be answered by all of you or many of you or some of you. If we just discussed before the COVID pandemic entering the third year now, how much do you think the global losses for this COVID-19? Maybe Prof. Atun, Prof. Ripert can answer this.
So thank you, Professor Thabrani, and I'd like to extend my thanks to Indonesia G20 presidency and also to T20 Secretariat for inviting me to the Inception conference. The cost of COVID-19 has been huge in health, societal, and economic terms. Honorable Minister mentioned the latest numbers in relation to the number of cases and number of deaths. And the recent estimates on the economic losses amount to in excess of 12.5 trillion, according to latest estimates by IMF, losses to 2024. But of course, these are losses now. There's going to be large amount of losses into the future, including intergenerational effects of the COVID-19. For example, United Nations and the World Bank have recently estimated that the so-called COVID-19 cohort of students will experience income losses of around $17 trillion in their lifetime employment. So the economic losses are huge for countries, for current and future generations, but there are also huge cost of COVID-19 on health systems. For example, one study has estimated that additional spending in fighting COVID-19 ranged from 130 to 230 billion to 600 billion to a trillion. Another study estimated losses, additional cost per month in low and middle income countries to be between 33 billion to 61 billion dollars. These are very large sums. So the consequences of COVID-19 on individuals, households, communities, societies, and economies are huge.
Thank you, Prof. Atun. Is Farah or Prof. Sachin, you want to add some?
I would, thanks a lot, Professor Thabrani. I think I would just like to add this dimension of huge global unemployment that has come in, particularly in the developing economies where we find COVID crisis, and according to recent ILO employment and social outlook trend of 2022, they have captured this figure of 186 million people who have lost out their jobs. And I think this is one big challenge we are seeing in terms of how global economy would be adversely affected. The idea is also in terms of the IMF sort of recent report, which places the cost to global economy of the size of $12.5 trillion. And of course, the deaths and virus load that already my colleague in the panel, Professor Rafat Khatun, has mentioned. So I think the economic losses are huge, and we require strategies that we would discuss later in terms of how these fiscal and monetary pressures on the economies can be reduced. Thank you.
Mrs. Farah, do you have a figure for Africa?
Yes, please, if I may. I think the Economic Commission for Africa, first of all, let me thank the T20 for inviting me, and of course the G20 presidency of Indonesia for having the Economic Commission for Africa on this panel today. And thank you, Professor Tablani. Let me just answer your question quickly. I think Professor Rafat Khatun has talked about a lot of the macro issues. But what we are also seeing on the continent, of course, is that, with every closure that we had, every month of closure because of the COVID-19 crisis, we lost about $69 billion. This is because a lot of our economies are, of course, tourist economies. And even if Africa itself didn't close down in huge abundance, every time Europe closed down, we had shortages of tourist receipts on the continent. For some countries, that's over 15% of their income. The second place where we've seen huge losses is, of course, around the current accounts. Our exports collapsed. A lot of African countries are net exporters of oil, and we saw huge losses, estimated at over $32 billion from countries like Nigeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, and Nigeria, of course, that is the largest exporter of petroleum. But in addition to that, what we also saw was a huge increase in poverty, and we're estimating that over 70 million more people fell into poverty during the year 2021 due to the COVID-19 crisis, of course, because of job losses in particular, but also because economies just contracted and we did not have enough of a safety net. As the ILO has shown, only 17% of the African countries have safety net programs that can keep people out of poverty.
So we observe all over the world that this pandemic, the health problems, has had adverse effect, very strong adverse effect on economics. Maybe it is the second worst after World War II. What do you think the pressing challenges faced by the world to end this pandemic? Maybe we can start from Sachin. How India and probably all your thought about the world challenge for that.
See, first and foremost, Professor Tablani, is more in terms of how we create health infrastructure, which is in terms of coping up with the modern demands. We have doctors, we have nurses, but you require skills at level 3 and level 4. So that kind of skills that are needed, the kind of health infrastructure which is needed, is something that is the first and foremost pressure on the economy. The second component, which probably has emerged in a major way, is in terms of how the employment generation, as I said, is to be sort of reinvigorated, particularly for medium, small, and micro enterprises. How we bring them in these kind of challenging times together. So credit creation, demand rejuvenation, and also linking up with the new infrastructure that is needed. So in this financial year, India has tried to create new allocations which are going to take forward the idea of digitalization of the health sector forward with digital infrastructure, trying to focus physical and social infrastructure interconnected, trying to create MSMEs and the supporting system for them, both through fiscal policies and also through monetary policies. Last but not the least is in terms of getting the inequities that are there in the vaccine access globally. India is trying to make some contribution in terms of sharing production, that facilities that India has nurtured over the last couple of years, they are delivering. India, as part of vaccine metri, is sharing vaccines with our fellow developing countries in the South. And that's where we require issues that are there. These are some of the pressing challenges. The inherent challenge in export is in terms of the TRIPS waiver and the issues related to the raw material. Thanks to the leadership of the United States, that now some of that raw material is available and we are able to produce and export and share the vaccines with our fellow developing countries. But I think we require a cogent global approach for ensuring the systemic changes that are needed. Thank you.
Mr. Songhae, what about in Africa? What do you think there are better or different pressing challenge for that?
I think a complementary, let me put it that way. Thank you, Professor. Let me maybe focus on three things. The first with this crisis is that, you know, African countries have not had access to sufficient liquidity like the rest of the world. We've done some work at the Economic Commission for Africa, which shows that in terms of sort of stimulus into the economy, the developed countries got about $11,200 per person, $11,200 per person as a sort of liquidity injection into different economies, whereas in 21 trillion is the overall number for all those economies. Emerging market economies got about $450 per person, whereas in Africa we got about $57. So again, there's been a huge gap in terms of, you know, resources or new liquidity that has been injected into these economies, and that really has been the problem, because I talked in the last segment about the need for subsidies or safety net transfer programs or school feeding programs. I think as the professor talked about schooling at Rabah Khatun, you know, we haven't had those resources. So that's really the first big issue. This has meant, and I go to the second problem, pressing challenge, has been vaccinations. At the Economic Commission for Africa, we worked together with the Africa CDC and also Afri-Exim Bank to put together a system called AVA, the African Vaccines Acquisition Task Team. And we were able to procure vaccines. But what we are seeing is now that even though we have the vaccines, it's difficult to sort of deploy the vaccines in terms of getting the right tools, being able to pay the doctors. Actually, one of the problems we're having now is that a lot of nurses are being, you know, migrating into Europe and other shores to go and do the nursing functions there. So we don't have enough healthcare workers to respond. But also what we saw is, yes, we are all focused on COVID, but you know what, the diseases that kill the Africans the most are still malaria, particularly young kids. It's still malaria, pneumococcal diseases. And so what we're trying to do is also, one of the challenges is how, as we focus on COVID, should we also be focusing on the top 4 disease waivers from WTO for the production of COVID vaccines. We can also try to do that for our other vaccines. And thirdly, you know, what this crisis has shown us is the importance of ICT. And only 17% of the continent has access to ICT, which means, again, as we said before, you know, we've seen that a lot of small and medium enterprise businesses that were not connected to the internet are the ones that have fared the worst in this crisis. And so getting, you know, first just the internet accessible, affordable is going to be, I think, an important challenge that we must combat, even to fight the COVID-19 crisis, but let alone as we try to recover from the crisis.
Thank you, thank you. Prof. Atun, have you observed and see how have many countries have reformed or adopted health reform to respond to this? Maybe also I will ask Your Excellency, Mr. Budi, can also say something on this, adopting health reforms. Prof. Atun.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the response has varied from country to country. And we've seen some countries really struggling to put together a system response to the pandemic. For example, being able to create surge capacity to cope with the increasing numbers of COVID-19, developing strong and resilient supply chains, putting in place digital solutions, putting in place testing and tracing, and scaling up vaccination programs. whereas others have been able to put together a good response. And those that have been successful have really invested in the development of digital systems to enable countries to identify where the infections were occurring, where the clusters were, digital solutions for testing and tracing, supply chain systems, and capacity to develop, manufacture, and scale up vaccination programs. So the critically important message in terms of the response to COVID-19 is that the system needs to function as a whole. The health system, not just one part of the system, not just the healthcare component, but also the organization of the public health system, the availability of financing, availability of additional resources that could be channeled into the system, and delivery of services that were targeted to managing COVID-19, but also the other conditions that Vera Song has mentioned, where there was a huge delay in access to health systems, and there's a huge backlog. What we've also seen in some countries is that beyond the health sector changes, there has been huge emphasis on the determinants of health in reforming the availability of welfare system, for example, through employment support, through creating a welfare net for individuals who are not able to work, and also targeted interventions for the vulnerable populations, older populations, and those with lower socioeconomic income groups. So the responses have varied greatly, but those that have been successful were those that had a holistic response, not a partial response.
Your Excellency, Mr. Sadikin, can you elaborate a little bit your experience? You've been doing reforming all the system in Indonesia. Can you explain what lesson can be done for
Yeah, I will share with you the reform that we are going to do locally and what we are going to propose globally as the president of G20. And actually, when I was appointed, the president gave me very clear 3 tasks. Number 1 is execute the vaccination program. Number 2 is to overcome this pandemic. And number 3, to do a major healthcare reform in Indonesia. And I asked him why me, because he said you have been experiencing in the global economic crisis twice, 1998 and 2008. It was started with the banking sector, and you are in the banking sector. So you understand what are the policy response, what are the good things, what are the bad things, and actually usually even in a major crisis, Indonesia successfully did a major reform in 1998 as an example. So he said, this global economic crisis started in health sector, it started in banking sector, use your experience to reform drastically the health structure in Indonesia. And locally, we have agreed that we will do 6 reforms. The first reform closest to my heart, and I'm passionately doing it, is the reform on the primary care. Second reform is reform on the secondary care, the hospital system, the reference system, why we don't have enough hospital, why people are dying in stroke, heart disease or stroke, because we don't have enough, not enough hospital, but enough doctors to treat on a certain stage. The third reform is reform in healthcare resiliency. How we make sure that pharmaceutical, therapeutics, diagnostic, vaccine is available in the country. We cannot rely again on the global value chain 100%. We need country as big as Indonesia, at least 50% we can produce end-to-end, cradle to grave in the country. And also we need to establish a network of surveillance system, enough surveillance system in the country, so we can identify if any potential outbreak in 13,000 islands of our country, we can identify quickly and quickly respond to that potential outbreak. The fourth reform is a reform in the healthcare financing system. We truly believe it has to be more equity on it, and it covers payment for a treatment that the country can sustainable do financing of the services. And the fifth reform is reform on the healthcare human resources. We don't have enough doctors. You only have 0.7 for every 1,000. We need to increase that very, very quickly. We will do reform on our education, faculty of medicine, hospital-based system, how we can invite and accelerate our healthcare professionals to graduate and go to the hospitals and facility centers, how to redistribute so all people in Indonesia, wherever they live, whoever they are, have the same right access. And the last reform on the healthcare technology. I split into two: the information technology, healthcare information technology reform, because I strongly believe big data, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence will change drastically the delivery of healthcare systems and also diagnostic of it. And the second reform is a reform on the biotechnology, because Indonesia is blessed by God. We have a Weber line and Wallace line. We have very rich biodiversity and genomic variety that can be used for future using biotechnology, a more precise and personal medicine or treatment. So those are the 6 reforms. Primary care, closest to my heart. Secondary care, healthcare system resiliency, healthcare financing, healthcare human resources, and healthcare technology.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.
One more thing, because
Okay.
as the president of G20, I need to share this also with all the team. As the president would like to propose a reform and 5 deliverables he would like to achieve on October, when we have a leaders meeting. First, I came from banking sector. During the global crisis, in matters of weeks, if any country have a monetary crisis, in terms of weeks, there is an institution called IMF can jump in and help with a very clear modalities, mechanism, participatory scheme, governance, and they have 1 trillion bazooka. We don't have it in healthcare. If we have a healthcare crisis, one of the country have a healthcare crisis, they are alone. It's very difficult to gather enough power like what the financial sector, global financial sector has compared with health sector has. The second that we would like to propose, yes, we understand that when you have a monetary problem, money is enough. When you have healthcare problem, money is not enough, like Indonesia. We have money, we don't have access to PPE. We don't have access to ventilators, vaccine, etc. So we need to build a mechanism where access to health emergency countermeasures when pandemic happens is there. Gavi has started, UNICEF has started making this, but we need to consolidate and make sure the accelerator mechanism, which is quite successful for this pandemic, can be make it more permanent. The third deliverable that I'd like to achieve, we need to better establish the global surveillance platform. If the enemy is coming, we need to work together globally, and we need to do it quickly. We are lucky that we have GIS-8, that all scientists suddenly believe in these institutions. So a Wuhan genome sequence can, in matter of weeks, can be distributed to US and Germany. So BioNTech and Moderna can quickly develop a vaccine, but we need to formalize these institutions where scientists trust. There is no geopolitical interest or economic interest. It is just the interest of humanity. The fourth deliverables that I'd like to do is we need to harmonize these global health protocols. I don't understand why in immigration that can be so simple. We have one single passport, every country has it, and one single protocols. In health sector, I have a different PCR test requirement, different vaccine requirement, quarantine requirement in every country that I visit. Make me very, very confused. The last one is we would like to make sure, hey, coming from a banking sector, I never put my eggs in one basket. So we need to redistribute the global manufacturing hubs and global research hubs
There's something happened in one country, especially to the southern country, to the developing country like us. We need to balance. If something happened in the northern side, we have something at least in southern of Africa. We have something in southern of Asia, in southern of America. So if something happened, not only the facility, the production capacity, but also the brain capacity is distributed. That is what we should do as the leaders in the health sector to give the future generation of our generation now a much better prepared for the future of pandemic. Thank you. Cannot hear you, Pak. We can't hear you.
You're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, Prof. Aton. As the system must be reformed, yeah. What do you see as you have a lot of experience in the world? What are three most urgent health system problems that should be reformed or to be paid attention by the government?
Thank you. I think Honorable Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin has really laid out a very robust program of work. I think there are three major issues. First of all, we have this innovation paradox. We've seen an incredible renaissance in relation to development, in relation to new diagnostics, new health technologies, digital solutions, telemedicine, vaccines, therapeutics. So we've had a massive delivery of innovations. But the health system part, the innovation on delivery, has not happened. So much of the investment has gone into upstream technology development, but the systems are not in place, unfortunately, to harness these technologies at scale, to make them accessible to everyone, to realize better value in health systems. So that needs to change, first and foremost. We need to continue investments in new technologies, new diagnostics, new vaccines, but also invest in health system organization, health system financing, health system resource management, as well as the delivery systems. The second big change needs to happen in the way we finance health systems. Currently, most health systems are financed either according to historic budgets or according to activity. Now, historic incremental budgeting, by definition, reflects history as opposed to current and future needs. And fee-for-service leads to inflation of activity, but without the improvements in outcomes in relation to more effective, more equitable, more efficient, and more responsive healthcare. So we need to shift towards new funding models, financing models that enable systems to realize better value. So more money for the system, but more outcomes for the money that is put in. The third transformation that needs to happen is digital transformation. Critically important. I fully agree with Honorable Minister Sadikin's comments. Digital transformation, harnessing data, harnessing machine learning and AI capabilities will enable us to, first of all, help resolve the human resource crisis that most health systems face by enabling healthcare professionals to discharge their duties and use digital solutions to do tasks that do not need healthcare workers. And secondly, using the large data to better understand the epidemiology so that we can develop more targeted policies and interventions to benefit those who are in greatest need. So universal health coverage needs to translate into targeted interventions that are accessed by all, especially those who are in greatest need. Unless health systems are fixed, we will not be able to achieve the desired outcomes.
Pak Hasbullah.
Yeah.
I think the virus has penetrated Pak Hasbullah Tabrani internet.
Hello?
So
yeah. I'm sorry. I think
the Omicron is
some signal problem.
very fast.
We have okay. We have another only a few more minutes. So let me ask you, three of the panelists, what type of global cooperation that can you prescribe to G20 leaders to overcome this situation that we've been discussed? Maybe by Mrs. Songwei first.
Yes, please. No, thank you. Thanks. I think a couple of things. The first one, as has been said, is a global pandemic preparedness facility is critical, and I know that the G20 is already thinking about that. By the end of last year, we didn't really get a lot of progress in that vein, but this will be something that's quite important. Here on the African continent, we already started meeting finance ministers and health ministers to see how one can prepare and build forward into the future and these things. But getting a global center where we can at least share ideas, and we saw when South Africa first identified the Omicron virus, the reaction that the rest of the world had, which essentially disincentivizes science. If we had a global pandemic preparedness type institution, my sense is we won't have this kinds of knee-jerk reactions. So that's number one. And eventually, even though we are now talking COVID and we're talking about a health pandemic, it should be something that almost begins to have sort of global risk preparedness, because the next crisis that we may have will be cybersecurity, conflict, terrorism, who knows? But something like that should be important. The second one is, of course, financing. I think the global financial architecture today, as we know and as we have heard from many of the speakers, is incredibly skewed. The AAA rated access to market countries today are all in the global West, or the global North, if you want to call them that. There's no countries in the emerging markets, or of course, crisis. What we saw was, huge downgrades of overall across the board in many of the emerging markets, making a difficult situation even worse. And so I think we do need to review a little bit, what are the accessibility conditions for market access. Compounding that, of course, was, the redistribution or the distribution of SDRs. Yes, we got $650 billion, but Africa, for example, only got 5%. Africa is one of the economies that needs these resources the most. And I think that, maybe reviewing and revising, who gets this transfer, this new transfers, will be an important part of the conversation. And then finally, and really, really important, is a global architecture that says when we have a crisis, we should not have, export bans immediately slapped on commodities that are the most needed. One of the reasons why we got huge inflation in many of the developing economies, and in Africa in particular, was 50% of our pharmaceutical products came from Europe. When COVID-19 hit, we got an export essential materials that we needed. I think this is linked to the TRIPS as well, and it's really, really important that in times of crisis, there is more multilateral cooperation as opposed to border closures that we are looking for. And then investment in the health infrastructure, investment in global infrastructure and energy. I think for that we need additional resources, and we do need to look at how the IMF and the World Bank use the SDRs to ensure that we can actually build forward better, given that we are also facing a climate change challenge on our continent, as are many other developing economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Songwei. Prof. Sachin, do you have another prescription?
Thanks, Professor Tablani. I think Honorable Minister Siddiquin has given us a very rich overview in terms of how he's planning to address the Indonesian crisis. And I think the challenges in the health sector and the 6 reforms that he talked about, quite a few of them are very relevant for global scaling up as well. I have quick 6 points which are slightly different, but definitely I would like to place them on the table for consideration. I think first and foremost, I fully agree with Minister Siddiquin. is in terms of the Global Alliance for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. We need a global surveillance system. We need greater ease of flowing of evidences, alerts among developing countries to put up the health system with surveillance resilience that is needed. And Rockefeller Foundation and Dr. S.R. Rao, Professor Kai, they all are working in this direction. And I think APAR-related initiatives should be strengthened. Second point that I want to bring in here is in terms of creating global public goods, which are important. And ideas like Health Impact Fund from Yale University, Professor Thomas Pogge, and from Calgary, Professor Aidan Hollis have been talking about this in terms of reducing the dead weight of patents, which Dr. Songwei talked about. I think it is important for us to see how a Health Impact Fund can compensate the ideas. The third point that I want to bring in is again close to what Minister Sadikin mentioned, a greater coherence between finance and health. And since I am on the Central Bank of India's board, we are seeing how Reserve Bank of India is trying to address the financial crisis that has led to, in terms of the pandemic crisis, the idea of supplementing monetary policy resources for financing. And that's where I think Indonesia's leadership through the G20 Joint Finance Health Task Force is very, very important. The genomics data sequencing, the idea of mutually recognized MRA, the Mutual Recognition Agreement for Health Digital System that Honorable Minister talked about, I think are extremely important. My fifth point is about how we bring in greater coherence across multilateral systems, be that in at WHO, when the COVAX and others have to be brought in, or even at WTO in terms of TRIPS, even UNIDO and UNCTAD, where we need industrial protection, the clusters to come in. And last but not the least is to bring back ethics in global governance back. The fact that countries multiply such dreaded research facilities and do not report to global systems, we require ethics to be back in global governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sin. Prof. Atun, you have a last comment on this global cooperation? Prof. Atun?
Thank you. So first and foremost, we need to move from intention and talk to action. As Minister Burikin has so rightly said, we need to establish a global mechanism, a global accord to rapidly put in place agreements for data sharing, for sharing of specimens, for enabling rapid scale-up of vaccine and diagnostics manufacturing, but very importantly, making these available to countries. So action is critically important. I think G20 can play a leading role in the development of this global accord for pandemics, not just for preparedness, but also for response and for resilience. Secondly, this process needs to be an inclusive process. As we heard, the current system is highly skewed. It is dominated by a few countries. There needs to be a true inclusive approach that includes all the countries, not just in decision-making, but also in the benefits. The third, we need to ensure that innovation happens at scale. We're able to put systems in place to rapidly channel innovations into systems. For example, why not expand the mandate of the Global Fund beyond AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria to include pandemics? There are already mechanisms that enable rapid channel financing into countries. Rather than creating an entirely new entity, use existing mechanisms. Fourth, there needs to be an integrated and multi-sectoral approach. This is not a healthcare problem. This is a broader problem that affects economies and societies. So whatever solution and response there is, it needs to go beyond just health sector. It needs to include economic sector, development sector, as well as financing sectors. And finally, we need to change our mindset. And given the huge impact of COVID-19, we should stop seeing healthcare as a cost and see it as a real investment that benefits individuals, communities, societies, and economies, a critically important investment. And for this, G20 should push for a one-off financing, like the Marshall Plan, to build health systems to enable them to be prepared, responsive, and resilient to the next wave of pandemics.
Hello? Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Prof. Atun. I think our time's it's up. I would like to conclude that we are having the very serious pandemic and evidence that this pandemic affects a lot of our life, economic, technology, and so on. But there are also opportunity to reform our system, and sharing all of us in G20 is the opportunity that we can share the concerns and opportunity and cooperation to overcome this kind of pandemic. Although no one expect there will be another pandemic, but we have to be prepared. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Udi Gunadi Sadikin, Professor Rifat Artun, Mrs. Ferai Songwe, and Prof. Sachin Chaturvedi for your excellent thoughts tonight, this morning, this afternoon.
Right. We have to be prepared indeed. Thank you so much, Professor Hasbullah Tabrani, for chairing this important discussion on imminent reforms ahead of us. And to Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin, Professor Rifat Atun, Ms. Vera Songwe, and Professor Sachin Chaturvedi for your invaluable insights to the T20 community to deconstruct the issues and laying out ways to meaningfully create lasting global reforms on health architecture and financing. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your active engagement in this Inception conference so far. I see some excellent proposals and references and inquiries flooding the chat box already from many parts of the globe. Please keep them coming as we continue engaging with our esteemed panelists today. Ladies and gentlemen, this event is organized by T20 Indonesia, co-hosted by Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS Indonesia, and Institute for Economic and Social Research, University of Indonesia, LPEM FEB UI. You can learn more about T20 Indonesia by visiting our website, t20indonesia.org, and by downloading the book profile from the link provided in the chat box. Now, I would like to bring you to the last session, but definitely not the least, in this day one of the T20 Inception Conference. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, achieving the true potentials from rapid digitalization of the global economy requires a new landscape of cooperation from all stakeholders to secure shared prosperity in the digital age. This time, I would like to call our Honorable Professor Suhono Harso Supangkat as Task Force 2 on Meaningful Digital Connectivity, Cybersecurity Empowerment Lead Co-Chair of T20 Indonesia for the next session on Optimizing Digital Transformation for Economic Recovery and Inclusivity. From 2007 till 2009, Professor Dr. Suhono Harso Supangkat was appointed as Special Advisor to the Minister of and Informatics of the Republic of Indonesia, and he was the chairman of the National Task Force on ICT Governance. He is also the Vice President of International Academy of CIO and the Director of Smart City and Community Innovation Center at ITB University Center of Excellence. To Professor Suhono, we have the pleasure to hand the screen over to you.
Thank you, Biondi. Belum ya?
You may please have the screen. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Biondi. Good evening, honorable speaker and participants. Special thank you for the organizing committee for the invitation and opportunity to chair the session on optimizing digital transformation for sustainable and inclusive growth. Digital technology has accelerated growth and development in a variety of industries, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. Nonetheless, digital disruptions eventually expose the digital gap, particularly in the term of internet connectivity or availability, people's digital skill and literacy, and cross-border data usage. Digitalization is a catalyst in a T20 Indonesia presidency. There are some priority, and the session is in line with one of the G20 priority. Of course, digitalization not only in one priority, but as a catalyst for all the pillar in a G20, for economic recovery, for health recovery, for climate change, etc., etc. And in this, one of the G20 priority, which is inclusive and equitable digital agendas, such as promoting equal access to connectivity and digitalization, developing digitally skilled communities, and encouraging continued global collective effort in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, so that the world can recover together quickly, recover stronger, recover together, and smarter in digital terms. So, to start the session, I would like to invite Professor Richard Baldwin to deliver his keynote remark. Richard Baldwin is a professor international economics at the Graduate Institute, Geneva, founder and editor-in-chief of the policy portal for EU organization. He served in the booth of White House and regularly advised governments and international organizations on globalization and trade policy issues. Professor Baldwin, you have around 15 minutes to deliver your remark. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to apologize that I can't be with you there in person, and in fact, can't even be there live. So I hope you will accept this video of my remarks that I hope will spark a vibrant discussion. So I also want to thank Professor Shonan for moderating the discussion. This talk is about telemigration and how telemigration is creating opportunities for emerging markets. The foundation for my remarks are my 2019 book, the cover of which you can see on the screen, called Globotics Upheaval: Globalization, Robotics, and the Future of Work. Now, that book was written primarily with rich country readers in mind. It was about the upheaval that the import of services could potentially cause in G7 countries. Later, in 2020, I wrote a paper with Richard Forslied, which is also on the screen there, Globotics and Development, When Manufacturing is Jobless and Services are Tradable, which is something of a thought piece of how the tradability of services, in particular, the provision of remote service tasks from abroad, could transform the development journeys of many, many countries. As all of you will know, most thinking over the last 100 years or so in development has focused on industry. But industry itself is changing for all sorts of reasons. And many emerging markets are finding it hard to get into manufacturing. Digital technology is opening up the ability to export services directly without people leaving. And it's played an important part in the development stories of countries like the Philippines or India or Costa Rica. What I'm going to conjecture, my proposition, so to speak, is that this will spread wider. And that's what my talk's going to be about. The first part, and it's a short talk, so I can see the moderator getting a little nervous that it looks like it's going to be an hour-and-a-half lecture, but it'll be short. The first part, I want to talk a little bit about telemigration, and then I want to talk about how it could change the emerging market development journeys. Could I get the next slide, please? So telemigration is nothing more than people sitting in one nation and working in offices in another. It's essentially teleremote work or remote work or work from home when the team is in different countries. Could I get the next slide, please? Now, the key economics of telemigration is that digitech is making it possible and the enormous wage gaps are making it profitable. In essence, globalization is always about arbitrage over relative prices. Whenever relative prices differ, there's an incentive for firms to make stuff in one place and sell it in another. Arbitrage in goods has eliminated the largest differences in goods prices across the world, but there still exist enormous relative wage differences, and those will drive the arbitrage I'm talking about. If I could get the next slide. I did some work last year on Colombia, telemigration in Colombia, and I worked with 2 Colombian labor economists to look at comparable wages in Colombia and the US. And here in this table, you see the professions, managers, professionals, etc., and the wage ratios between the United States and Colombia. And what you'll see is most of those ratios are over 10. So that means 10 times higher wages, and the median is 17 times higher wages, which creates an enormous opportunity for arbitrage. Now, of course, the Colombian workers are not going to be as productive in American offices as American workers would, but with a 17 times wage difference, I suspect the arbitrage will start once it becomes possible, and it is increasingly becoming possible. Could I get the next slide, please? Now I want to talk about how digitech makes this possible. So first of all, domestic remote work, which has surged in the rich countries, is essentially preparing the ground so that rich country firms learn how to manage, deliver, and secure services that are provided by remote workers. And as they get used to that kind of provision and their customers get used to receiving services delivered online, there will be an increasing perception that they could get some of the elements of that done much cheaper if it was done in emerging markets. The second is freelancing platforms, which are essentially like eBay, but for services. So small and medium enterprises can actually outsource various service tasks by these freelancing platforms like Upwork or Freelancer, or there's a bunch of them. Advanced telecoms, I don't have to tell you about that. We're using it right now. But as we all see in the newspapers and in our news feeds, it's getting much better, including what they call the metaverse, which is virtual reality meetings. And there's also augmented reality meetings. So Zoom, which actually isn't that great, it's much better than it used to be and much better than conference calls, but it's getting much better because of digital technology. The next point is machine translation. One of the biggest barriers to trade and services is the fact that not everybody speaks the same language, but instant, simultaneous machine translation is getting very good as the AI progresses and the processing speeds get better. That will bring a huge talent pool into the English-speaking, French-speaking, German-speaking, Spanish-speaking, Arabic-speaking, Chinese-speaking world. Lastly, digital technology is unbundling what I'd like you to think of as a service value chain. And if you give me the next slide, I'll explain that. So think about this down at the bottom, the insurance value chain. There's a product design, pricing and underwriting, distribution, administration, and claims management. Now, in the old days, the pre-digital days, that was all done in one building, basically all organized together, because it was so difficult to coordinate the many different types of activities going on. But as digital technology has proceeded, companies in the rich countries have fragmented this value chain and put to remote work some of these elements of this. So basically, the service value chain is unbundling spatially. So there's been an unbundling of offices, not factories. So say 25 years ago, it was the factories which unbundled and certain stages of production were put in emerging markets. Now I'm saying that offices in the rich countries will unbundle and certain tasks will be offshored. Could I get the next slide, please? So this is going to lead to some necessary changes in perception. So first of all, you should be thinking tasks, not occupation. The occupation of an accountant is not being offshored from New York to Jakarta. It's some aspects of that accounting value chain which are being offshored. Second, think intermediate services, not final services. A lot of the OECD service trade restriction indices and much of the statistics that are gathered online are about final services like final architecture, final medicine, final accounting, final financial services. But those probably won't be what's traded. It's the intermediate services that go into making them that will be traded. Things like graphic design, translation, copy editing, receipt entry, fact checking, all sorts of things. The next point is that there is little or no trade protection in rich countries for this kind of services. And the reason was because the protection was all loaded onto regulation of the final delivery. So for example, if you want to provide architectural services here in Switzerland, you need a Swiss degree to do that. But to do the designs, you're perfectly free to hire people located in Bangalore or Sri Lanka or wherever, as long as you testify that it's correct. So as soon as digital barriers come down, there is no protection to stop this trade in intermediate services. The last point is digital barriers started way higher for services, thousands of %, so much so that most services are considered non-tradable. But they're coming down at an eruptive pace and much faster than goods barriers. If I could get the next slide, please. So COVID has quickened all this. Lots of people were already fired, which makes it easier for rich country firms to replace remote workers, to replace them with remote workers. The COVID forced an emergency digital transformation that's lasting and massive. Social distancing rules, at least for a while, are raising the cost of in-person workers versus white-collar robots or telemigrants. And firms in the rich countries are under extreme cost pressures, and so will have an incentive to lower the cost of the intermediate services. Could I get the next slide, please? So what are the implications for the emerging markets? My first projection or conjecture is that the emerging market miracle will continue and spread. Up to now, the emerging market miracle has been mostly based on manufacturing, and that's only worked for about 6 or 7 countries like Vietnam and China, or commodity exporters like, say, Nigeria. But this will spread by allowing a much wider range of emerging markets to have an export boom. If I could get the next slide. First of all, the fact is that service trade is growing faster than goods trade. So I'm not making all this up. It is actually happening. And if you look at some of the indicators of telemigration services, the statistics is very poor, by the way, the trade statistics in services. But if you kind of look at the services which roughly correspond to telemigration, like say business services, that's growing 5 times faster than goods trade. So if I could get the next slide. So my projection is services trade will dominate future trade everywhere because the barriers are much, much higher and they're falling much, much faster. That's a perception that I think all countries, rich and poor, will have to get used to. Could I have the next slide? Now, this is, in some sense, explaining why the economics of exporting services is easier than the economics of exporting goods. So digitech will allow emerging markets to export their advantage directly. Now, emerging markets' competitive advantage is low-cost labor adjusted for quality. And now you have to take that labor and put it into farms or factories. They produce goods and then the goods are exported. But the source of the competition is the low-cost labor. What trade and services does is allow the direct export of low-cost labor into the markets. And this won't be the cheapest uneducated people. These will be people who are essentially middle class or educated in the emerging markets, but they'll be able to export directly, and all the agglomeration, all the ports, the factories, all those problems don't really exist in services, or at least are on a much smaller scale, because scale economies and agglomeration aren't as important. Could I get the next slide, please? This is another conjecture, that time zones will matter more for trade in services, telemigration, than it does for trade in goods. So I think of Latin America as providing the telemigration services to North America, Africa providing the telemigration services to Europe, and Southeast Asia providing the telemigration services to Northeast Asia. Now, of course, there'll be some back and forth, but as happens with remote teams in, say, the US or France or wherever, companies have been forced to go to remote working, the time zone really matters. It's much harder to integrate people from far away. If I could get the next slide, please. So that's it. I just wanted to provoke your thoughts. It's not exactly what you'd call a solid piece of research, which is thoroughly worked out, but I wanted to change the way you think a little bit about the role of services and migration, and suggest that most emerging markets in the future will develop by exporting services, not goods. Thank you very much for your attention. And again, sorry I can't be there. I'll pass the screen back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Badwin. It's very inspiring in regard first of digital technology transform our life, enforcing our life, work from anywhere, work from home, healthcare from home, etc., etc. It is interesting, inspiring, and then give us a new emerging market with the service as a future of our trade. Well, from moving on, we will now have about 40 minutes talk show. Besides Professor Badwin, we are going to have 3 other panelists joining us tonight. I would like to invite Professor Fukunari Kimura, Professor Huang, and Ms. Barbara Navarro from the industrial side. Good evening. First of all, I would like to introduce the panelists. Our first panelist, Professor Fukunari Kimura, Konbanwa, is the Chief Economist at Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area, Jakarta, and also as a professor at the Faculty of Economic, Keio University, Keio Daigaku. His major is International Trade and Development Economics. He recently wrote extensively on international production network, economic integration, and the digital economy. The second, our panelist from academia, Professor Jun Seok Hwang, is a professor of information science and technology at Technology Management, Economic and Policy Program, TMEP, and Director of Global R&D Center, International Technology Professional Program, ITPP, and Transdisciplinary Graduate Program in Smart City Global Convergence, SCGG, in Seoul National University. Prior to this, he was an assistant professor in the School of Information Study at Syracuse University. He received his PhD in Information Science and Telecommunication from the University of Pittsburgh, and master degree in Telecommunication from the University of Colorado. And the final, our last but not least panelist is Ms. Barbara Navarro. Hello. Ms. Navarro is the Head of Government Affairs and Public Policy Google Cloud APAC. This one from industry. Ms. Navarro Google 13 years ago, where she started as head of South of Europa at the Public Policy and Government Relations team. In November 2014, she moved to Hong Kong to learn the operation and strategy public policy team of Asia Pacific. Currently, Ms. Navarro is leading the Google Cloud team for government affairs and public policy for APAC, based in Singapore. Before joining the Google, Ms. Navarro was at NBC Universal as Director of Regulatory Affairs and at Clark Modet & Co., an intellectual property firm, as a Director of Trademark. Well, I would like to start with first our panelist is Professor Fukunari Kimura. We have see the keynote speaker, Professor Bladwin, and we will know about, from your perspective, what is the definition of digital transformation? What is challenge are faced by the government, private sector, community, cities, maybe maritime in Indonesia and Japan to achieve a useful digital transformation? Okay.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Pak Suhono. Ladies and gentlemen, so first I'd like to congratulate Indonesia for the G20, T20 chairmanship this year. Yeah, so the question is, what is the definition of digital transformation? So maybe we can Google that, but in my definition, I think the digital transformation means that the digital technology will penetrate into the whole economy, enhance the productivity of existing industries, and also at the same time generate new businesses, and at the end improve people's welfare. That's my definition of digital transformation. So suddenly we have a bunch of challenges. Starting for private sector, I'd like to highlight one aspect. We have many challenges, I cannot list, but so one highlight from me is that actually the digital businesses are really shifting their weights from simple matching businesses to supporting businesses for other industries to be digitalized, actually. So that's a sort of digitalized businesses important now. So how we can have digitalizing businesses for other industries, that is going to be more important. And also the capability of other industries to utilize those kind of businesses. So I think at the end, the contents, the quality, or maybe the upgrading of goods and services produced by other industries, that would be at the end the most important. So not just a sort of a simplistic matching businesses, but we really have to think of digitalization of the whole economy. So that's the challenge, particularly for private sector. So for communities, including usual people, I think communities should take advantage of digital connectivity, definitely. Digital connectivity is different from physical connectivity, particularly information data and matching opportunities or digitalized services can be transmitted through digital connectivity, and we can forget the physical distance. So how we can effectively utilize that is very important for communities, and also this is a challenge. For the government, there are many things to do, certainly, but government should provide secure and efficient policy environment, certainly, and fully utilize private initiatives, private incentives in the right direction. I think a government cannot do everything. Rather, government should properly control the private incentives over there. That's very, very important. So at the end, we will have telemigration. As Richard Baldwin said that. I'm actually an avid subscriber of his writings, but yeah, so we would have a sort of quite different international division of labor too. So particularly the newly developed economies and developing countries should take advantage of that new type of transactions over there. That's my answer so far.
Okay, thank you. This is a good definition and some experiences in a global or local. And we would like to know what is the feasible common framework for the G20 in regarding digital transformation.
Yeah, so G20 is a very difficult forum. So it's very difficult to find a really common framework, but at least we can claim inclusiveness at the center. So that's a sort of really central theme even when we talk about the digital technology. And also for newly developed economies and developing countries, they have to capture opportunities for leapfrogging. So that's a sort of key message that we really have to put there. And the two highlights would be that one of it is to emphasize small players. So small players is different from, say, giant platformers, giant global platformers, probably. We have a bunch of small platformers and also platform users. Those are sometimes businesses and sometimes consumers. Those are small players. We really have to highlight small players there. So when we talk about policies, certainly we have a bunch of policies for large players, but we have to think of that in the context of those are four small players. So it's taxation, competition policy, private data protection. Certainly we have to take care of those kind of things, particularly for giant platformers, but some of them are really going to sort of benefits for small players. So small players can get a lot of benefits from giant platformers. At the same time, we have to sometimes protect small players from the abuse of market power and other things. Certainly, so we have to take care of that. And also policies for small players. It's not really controversial, even if in a G20 context. Enhance connectivity, nurture startups, and also accelerate technology spillovers, business model and development, nurturing human capital. I think those are not really sort of controversial issues that we have to claim. The other highlight could be the link to services trade liberalization. Actually, say IT services and other business services are digitalizing and also digitalized services. And sometimes developing countries are afraid of sort of a strength of multinationals. But in this context, actually in digital services particularly, technology spillover may be easier to capture than in other traditional industries like manufacturing, because I say manufacturing, we need incremental innovation with a huge R&D and other things. But digital services are coming up from disruptive innovation. Sometimes that is much easier to imitate. And also local adaptation of those kind of services is very important too. So that is an advantage of local players. So don't be afraid of multinationals too much in this context, I think. So we have smaller room for infant industry protection argument here. So I think mode 1 and mode 4 are of course important, but at the same time mode 3 in order to have great benefits and also great technology spillovers, we need mode 3 liberalization, particularly on the side of newly developed and developing countries. So that could be the second highlight that we are talking about. We could talk about in G20.
Yeah, platform development, global synergy, and also in integration is, there are a lot of policy proposal from the researcher in the world, we receive it. So I think there is our homework to make in standardization, model, and also in a framework for our collaboration in the world. It is very our challenge in the future. And about the connectivity, if in Indonesia, when we change school from the home or school in our house, there are a lot of problems with the connectivity. And
Right.
Indonesia is very big. Maybe in India, maybe
Right,
in also
sure.
in Argentina is very big. So connectivity is one of the critical issue in a complete digital transformation, and facing the issue that contribute to the digital divide. What is your view in the current state of connectivity in the G20 countries?
Yeah, the one thing that I can say is that certainly digital divide still exists, and it's a very important issue to take care of. We have probably 3 dimensions in a digital divide. One is the geographical. So this is country-to-country different connectivity, and also urban-rural, definitely. And also the second dimension is industrial. So who can utilize the digital technology, multinationals versus local firms versus large firms versus MSMEs. We have a big gap over there too. And the third dimension is the societal, so including, say, gender issues that Marie Pangestu mentioned. So I think that certainly we have to take care of first technological accessibility, of course. So that's the first thing that we have to take care of. But now that in COVID-19 particularly, I think digital connectivities are improving, I would say, pretty rapidly. Still not quite enough. We have to take care of that. Yeah. But the issue is shifting from just physical connectivity, technical accessibility to capability of users, actually, capability of users of digital technology. So I think we have to emphasize that aspect more when we talk about digital divide. And also connectivity is, we have digital connectivity and physical connectivity. Both are important, both are complementary. So we have to have both, particularly when we talk about trade liberalization or facilitation for small parcels for e-commerce, or last minute transportation for e-commerce, for example. So we need both. And also, one more thing is that in COVID-19 particularly, you mentioned education, e-education, and we have e-medical, and also e-government services, e-payment, fintech. I think those are really explosively disseminating a sort of various business models over there. So I think still we have a lot of big gaps, but we have a lot of hope too, actually, to accelerate digital transformation for people's daily life too. So we have to look at the sort of best practices in neighboring countries and the other countries for those kind of things. And that's another thing that G20 can do.
Yeah. Thank you. Very nice talk and idea from Kiniura-san.
Thank
The
you very
second
much.
is from Professor Huan. We would like to continue with our discussion with warmer and warmer. First, I would like to ask about how do you see the role and direction of innovation in digital technology? Not only digital divide, but also innovation in digital technology in the pandemic and the future of the impact of the pandemic. Technology such as an IoT, AI, blockchain, NFT, and also maybe metaverse is becoming a trend. So what do you think about that?
Thank you, Professor Suhono, for the invitation. And we all share these very important innovation word as a common knowledge: AI, IoT, blockchain, NFT, and metaverse. Somehow, I believe we don't have any gap, dealing with many new development and new product and new ideas in the world, which is good thing. This kind of common discussion was not possible 50 years ago. But I think knowledge sharing, what we are doing, is a great thing. And at the same time, we are facing also same threat that together in globally, like a pandemic and climate, changes, and many, forthcoming challenge will not be local. I believe it will be global, like we are. But for such reason, but we are ready to face that as a global community. I believe that's why G20 is very important. Maybe most of the problem we were facing were not shared that much, and it was local problem and only solution from the local. But I think the most of that what we are having is our humanity and our globe is facing. For such a reason, I think we are still in the pandemic, but we are in the very end, at the end and edge of endemic. And Korea now, announced that our QR checking and GPS will not be usable, or we will not use it anymore, because we have actually maybe passed over some period that was very threatening, but now we actually become a daily life. So going back to your question in regard to what would be the direction and also role, I think with this innovation and also digital technology of AI, IoT, and other things, now these are toward to more of not only digitization and digital, what we say, transformation. So when we say transformation, it's a totally the way of living and way of we dealing with the problem, the way of we do the work will be totally changed. Oh, we have to change ourselves. So technology itself is not a matter. How we use the technology and how we make our environment to adopt those technologies is very important. And so for that reason, that I think that all these are technology available, but for some reason that we did not make this one usable in many cases, for the economic reason, for the social reason, and cultural reason. And I think, but pandemic really pushed us toward to use those things. I think those are not wrong thing. That what we have to do is, we have to change. Then we can adopt and also face this problem. The second one on these direction, so those are more toward, we will be more knowledge-based economy, and represented by these transformative actions. The second one is convergence. I believe that we'll face more converged problem, and also the converged world in terms of the not only technological convergence and regulatory and also policy. The area we will be dealing with a lot of convergence issues, and at the same time also industry will be very creative by having many industry boundary to be converged, which will create also new market. And certainly definitely what all G20 is very interested in is new economy, what we so-called digital economy. So digital economy is not only about that we are dealing with the digital product, but the way we do the financing, currency, right? And the way we relying on like online, offline, together, and hybrid format of working, and also new way of insurance, and dealing with our private data. And so these creator economy and digital economy will be the new direction. Certainly, these innovation and technology will make us to live in different way and with different rule. And I think we should be, as a G20, we should be able to make a role model framework in a more more of a desirable situation. I would not say the perfect, but I think
Okay. Okay, thank you. It's a nice answer. And then the second question is, how should country approach it, and what are the key issues, and how the role of the collaboration that you are as also the international global coordination for the collaboration, and what is your advice to set up it?
Yeah, well, I think we may see Netflix, and then maybe you see Squid Game from Korea, and so that is a local act, but it is created as a global through the Netflix, and also the ideology, the idea humanity dealt with is truly global there, even though the story is from the local, right? And so always I say creatively, humans are created global, but we are locally acting. But I think in the future, these collaborations should do in all dimensions of innovation, which I would say global innovation and national innovation and regional innovation. And so we used to have in economics these innovation system idea, global innovation system and national innovation system, and also regional innovation system. I believe our society should be ready to make these and not only divided dimension, but that like Professor Suhono working in globally, but also locally, also very strongly working as a leader, and also regionally in the Asia Pacific. And I think more about new generation, our society will need of such talent that all of us should live in all those dimensions, global, local, and what I say is generative innovation, GNR, generative innovation system. So I think our collaboration should work on such kind of multi-faced and the global, national, and regional together. Yeah.
Thank you. Digitalization or digital transformation produces data. Data as an asset, data as a capital. But there are also risks. And what do you think about the data governance as an essential element to reduce cyber risk and threat and ensure to the free flow of data? What is the role of the G20 setting the agenda on this issue?
Yep. Well, I think in the beginning, we all talk also, G20 is also a very complex society, but at the same time, G20 has a responsibility to represent global world. And so in that regard, global value of data governance, we have to think about it. And so so when it come, all our different language and living style become to data, and then when these become to the data with a certain format that we made as a meta, data, and finally, we would be able to, share that more effectively. So, but, even though it is technically possible, if there's no trust building and no way of, intelligence compatibility, and also, there, and then it is not, implemented. So the trust building in these, in the data governance in the global society, very important. But how we can raise and improve the trust, within many different territories. And so I have a 3 solutions for that. First solution for one is like we say, the capacity building. But capacity building, education, but doing it globally, global capacity building, or doing education, doing capacity building together for the data governance or for the expert needed, for the people who will be working on living. We do more of a global capacity building in the G30 20 context, so that these people who learn and also develop their capability really become one community, right? And so that I think that is one way of doing the trust level increase, that these data flow and then then can be more effectively done in the long run. The second one I'd like to say is also the global infrastructure strategy, and there's some common way of view of what the future living place will be. For that sense, I think we have a lot of things that coming up, but like such as the smart city idea. I think smart city is one of the very important global civilization movement, which captures not only the technology and data, but also our human culture and many of other things. So I think putting into smart city as a kind of one of our next level, which is also UN SDG, the sustainable city and the SDG 11. So and having certain strategic way of doing data governance to be well practiced, and then having some global collaboration on smart city as a G20 agenda will improve the data sharing and also data. Certainly, and I think I would say open innovation. So maybe how we foster the open innovation in the global context. Maybe personally we are very open, but our organization and groups, institutions are not are bounded with our regulation. We create a global open innovation network and group. I already have some the community building on that one, which is so-called global open innovation, and such kind of global open innovation network and group or center should be there, and then we actually federate and collaborate together with the open innovation theory, and that would be one of the way that we make the trust level in this G20 context.
Okay, thank you. This is there are a lot of idea from Professor Juan, and finally, smart city is one of the good approach for our improve the quality of life and so on. Then in the final panelist is Ms. Barbara. There are also 3 questions. One is we talk about the human capital as digital literacy. Human capital cannot be separated from essential in digital transformation success. So how can G20 contribute to closing the digital literacy and skill gap that exists, especially in low medium income countries? What is the thinking?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And first of all, thanks for inviting Google to be part of the T20 Inception conference. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Then about this important question related with human capital, let me start saying that as more people get online and more business are going through the digital transformation, digital literacy and education remains critical. I mean, and it is critical for 2 main reasons. One is to ensure that the internet economy, it works efficiently for us as individuals, but also to ensure that as more we move people into the online world, I mean, they feel safe and secure, right? Then there is a couple of challenges that I want to bring to the attention to the audience related with human capital and digital literacy and education. One is educating new users, and why this is a challenge. Let me share with you a couple of figures here, and it's the speed, right? The speed of how much people is getting online. Southeast Asia region, I mean, alone added 40 million new internet users last year. And this goes on top of the 40 million people who came online in 2020. This brings the region to an internet penetration of 75%. but additionally, 60 million people start using digital services for the first time following the pandemic. Then this is the numbers that we are talking about, and this is, the amount of people that really needs, to ensure that is educated and get benefit from the internet economy. The second challenge that I want to bring to your attention is equipping the new digital workforce. I mean, we are seeing a shortage of technical talent. This is a big challenge. We need to ensure that we invest in a reliable pipeline. If, the other generations, I mean, we used to learn a job and that was it. It was enough, right? But now you need to learn, relearn, and re-skill yourself all the time. Then this is critical too. About G20, I will say a strong commitment about strength access to the web, and of course a strong commitment around developing of digital skills. One thing that we think is working really well is the public-private collaboration, right? And I think that you will hear from me that I will mention this public-private collaboration a little bit more during the next questions. And let me talk about a specific program that is working very well, that is micro certifications. And I have to call out here the Indonesia government, right? The Indonesia government has, a few initiatives like Campus Merdeka program, for example, or digital talent scholarships that are a great example of this public-private collaboration related with digital skills.
Okay, thank you. Very nice answer. And the second question is, from your point of view, how can the G20 accelerate technology adoption, particularly for small medium enterprise, and how the role of the industry for it?
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. We know that SMEs plays a critical role, right? And a critical role in the economy. And we are seeing that more and more merchants are getting online, they're selling their products in different platforms. They have a full range of ways to pay online. But, even when we have seen this migration, to the digital world, still a very big amount of SMEs that, they challenge with with digitalization, and it's a challenge for them to move to the cloud, for example, even when it brings, cost advantages. Then what G20 can do to accelerate technology adoption by SMEs? Sharing some thoughts here. Again, I mean, establishment of a public-private partnership to enhance SME access to digital tools. I want to call out here, for example, a partnership that we have done with the National Security Agency in Singapore, right, to train SMEs on security, right? That is so important. What else? Policies. We talk, I mean, the other panelists talk about policies and regulation. It's extremely important to ensure, that policies are balanced between consumer protection and ensuring that the SMEs can benefit from going online. Sometimes they hit a wall. There is so many regulation and policies that they need to comply with that they are not able to comply with everything, or they have to do huge investments to do it. And the third one is, let's try to, reach regional agreements to avoid fragmentation, right? And this is something that I want to call out. We are seeing more and more fragmentation, right? More regulation that, we force SMEs to comply. And one of the purpose of going digital is to ensure that they can reach a global audience, right? But if when they operate in different countries, they need to comply with different regulation, it's hard for the SMEs. Very quickly, a few SMEs programs from our side has been the Go Digital ASEAN program to support SMEs and unemployed youth and people with disabilities in rural areas. We have invested also in programs that are for job seekers. And I want to highlight here the Google Career Certificate, for example, and another recent initiative with the Singapore government. Then again, this public-private collaboration is critical, right? And we should continue working together on this.
Yeah. Okay, the final question for you is security is one of the main challenge in the digital era. What is your idea to solve the challenge?
Yeah, well, look, I remember some years ago that companies didn't want to move to the cloud because it was not secure enough. And now companies want to move to the cloud because it's more secure, right? Then as security can be a challenge, but for sure, I mean, going online and moving into the cloud has become, the best solution to keep a workload secure. Then I think that is extremely important that we understand that security should be something that we integrate by default, right? And as more companies go through the digital transformation, of course, they will be it will be more important to ensure that they operate in a protected environment. But let me mention three main initiatives that we are supporting, and I think that's where probably this is a general view of where security needs to be, we need to double down. One is extending the zero trust security model. To trust more the digital world, you need to trust less the digital world, right? And trust that allows access to information must be earned. This is very important. The second piece is securing the software supply chain, right? And we have talked about a supply chain. It is important. The more we rely on the supply chain, on the software, on the supply chain, we need to ensure that there is, standards and there is specific requirements, which they're not right now. And the last one that is very important, and we have talked about this already, is we need to invest more on security, people to develop security skills, specialists on security, engineers that develop more security products and services that are more secure, right? Then this is from one side is a challenge, but from the other, it's very clear that this is the solution that is going to bring us to a better and how I say this, a better and faster adoption of the digital world and going through this digital transformation.
Thank you. Nice answer and nice insights. So in this session, we have one keynote speaker with a very interesting insight with the digital technology give a new opportunity for teleworking from the work from office becoming work from home and work from anywhere. And also in healthcare, not only in hospital, but also in home or in anywhere. And Professor Kimura has also gave insight about what is the digital transformation and what is the challenge in digital transformation. And Professor Huang also talked about the innovation and global collaboration and smart city, and also with Barbara talk about human capital. Okay, I would like to invite maybe only 1 minute to the last statement from the panelists. First, from Professor Kimura.
I think it's a great opportunity for Indonesia to host a G20. So that's very, very challenging. We have quite different countries participating in this forum, but it's a really important opportunity to represent newly developed and developing countries in the world. I think hopefully that you can make a good one. And also the connection between T20 and G20, sometimes that's challenging too. So hopefully that you would do a good job on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. The second is yes, hope was statement from Professor Huang.
Thank you. Like a G20, we, all of us here and our current humanity, I would like to say that we are G generation, so which represent global generation. So many people say we try to divide 10 year, but whoever who are leaving us now global generation. So This generation is actually dedicated to solve the global and human problem. I believe we are a very important generation, and G20's effort, to do, to make our global society as a one community, and also challenging and also solving the problem and creating a solution for the and also opportunity for the new generation, that our G generation can continue. So I'd like to say that congratulations for the for Indonesia to host our G generation. I look forward to having our G generation really play very pioneering leadership in the world, for the future generation. Thank you.
Well, the time is finished, but maybe 1 second for Barbara.
1 second, 1 second. I will say investing in education, develop a balanced regulatory ecosystem, and be able to work on this private and public collaboration to speed digital transformation. It's going to be critical.
Thank you for the keynote speech, and also our panelists and also participants in this Inception conference. There are a lot of our homework to implement our idea to making shaping the future. There are any challenge, but also there's some potential solution with the digital technology, and digital technology is cross-cutting in all our work. So once again, thank you for all panelists and also participants. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Suhono, for chairing our plenary session 2 of this T20 Inception conference, and to our esteemed speakers, Professor Richard Baldwin, Professor Fukunari Kimura, Professor Jun Sok Hwan, and Ms. Barbara Navarro. We are confident and hopeful that the Inception conference have sparked interest and ideas on some of the major building blocks to optimize digital transformation for economic recovery and inclusivity. Distinguished T20 community, we've heard and hopefully further internalized from today's session that we are at the pivotal and urgent standpoint to resolve global health architecture and digital transformation issues on top of the sea of geopolitical tensions, widening inequality, and disparity of coping capacity. Indonesia stands ready to lead the inception of novel collaborative and evidence-based solutions backed by its unique nature as an emerging economy with rich diversity. Before we close the day 1 of this conference, I would like to once again inform you that this conference does not end here and now, but will continue tomorrow on Climate, Finance, and Sustainable Development Keynote, followed by a plenary session 3 on Accelerating Energy Transition. Tomorrow's event will start at 6:05 p.m. Jakarta time. It will start at 6:05 p.m. Jakarta time. On behalf of our partners who have supported this conference, our sponsors, Telkom Indonesia and Samudra Indonesia, and our knowledge partners, the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia Area, Knowledge Sector Initiative KSI, and the Asian Development Bank Institute ADBI. My name is Biondi Sima, and on the organizing committee's behalf, I would like to thank you for your great enthusiasm and engagement throughout this event. If you're missing the earlier part of today's session, the recording of this session is available on T20 Indonesia official website, t20indonesia.org. We also invite you to continue engaging with T20 community through our Twitter account at T20 Solutions and at Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube at T20 Indonesia. Keep us engaged with your thoughts, concerns, inputs, and ideas for the betterment of T20 contribution to the G20 Indonesia's agenda. Recover together, recover stronger. We thank you all for making time to join us here today. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Stay safe and have a good remaining of the day.
At the current affairs where we witnessed lingering COVID-19 pandemic, global economic recovery remained unfavorable to be achieved. Global inequality rise to a level that never seen in the past decade. Mobility restriction policies resulting from COVID-19 prevention measures have disabled many communities to fulfill their daily needs. Risks of divisions between social groups exacerbated as the threat of scarring effect to the future generations, as well as increased risk of systemic default that put financial sector under pressure, have made the exit strategy from COVID-19 pandemic even more challenging to be executed. Such risks also result in prolonged trust deficit among countries that slow down efforts to tackle greater long-term issues, such as climate change and massive biodiversity extinction. All of these phenomena need to be followed with better formulation of economic and policy approach under one coordinated action. The Think 20, or better known as the T20, is the G20's official engagement group that connects think tanks worldwide. The T20 serves as a global ideas bank, bringing together experts from the most relevant think tanks and research institutes worldwide. The T20 develop and communicate research-based policy recommendations to the G20 leaders. In its 10th year, the T20 under the Indonesian presidency will be present to systematically produce practical policy proposals for G20 decision makers. This year, T20 highlighted 3 strategic issues. First, promoting greater cooperation for stronger, balanced, and resilient recovery. Achieving resilient and inclusive economic recovery simultaneously by global economies is essential to reduce the risk of having prolonged crises that affect unevenly across social classes. Second, advancing concerted effort for inclusive and sustainable development. Post-pandemic development in times of changing climates needs to also consider environmental issues, while also inclusive to all communities and aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. And third, managing digital transformation to utilize technological progress. The unprecedented digital transformation as a result from COVID-19 pandemic should align with innovation that benefits communities worldwide. These strategic issues will be discussed further by think tanks across the world under the coordination of T20 Indonesia's 9 task forces. Together, these task forces, as well as all T20 participants, will join under our series of events. Alongside the support provided by these task forces, T20 Indonesia will be led by our lead co-chairs as well as executive co-chairs. The T20 Indonesia, hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the Institute for Economic and Social Research, University of Indonesia, both are think tanks that play important roles in policy-oriented research. Recover together, recover stronger.